Shabbat Shalom, City Assemblies family. It's a blessing to have you here with us as we enter this time of rest and reflection. We're excited to welcome everyone tuning in today, whether you're joining us for the first time or you're already part of our City Assemblies family. If you find these teachings helpful and encouraging, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're helping us reach more people with messages of hope and faith. We'd also love for you to share this podcast with friends and family who may need encouragement today. Stay connected with us throughout the week. Join us this Wednesday for our Bible study on overcoming fear with faith, where we'll look at David's courage in facing Goliath. And be sure to join us next Shabbat for a heart of gratitude, cultivating thankfulness through every season. Let's get started with today's message.
Ever feel like you're searching for, I don't know, maybe like a little glimmer of hope when everything feels totally chaotic?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, that's what we're diving into this week. And get this, we're exploring it through a City Assemblies podcast.
Okay.
That's focused on finding hope in times of crisis.
Interesting.
All based on Jeremiah 29:11.
You know, that verse, it gets quoted a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
But what's really fascinating is the context.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't written for some feel-good Instagram post or something.
Right.
This was written to the Israelites.
Okay.
During their exile.
Wow.
A time of intense hardship and uncertainty.
It's almost like a paradox, right? This message of hope.
Yeah.
But delivered to people who'd lost everything. So, I mean, that's kind of what our deep dive is all about today, right?
Yeah, totally.
Figuring out how that ancient wisdom applies to our modern lives.
And what practical takeaways we can actually get from this podcast and the Israelites' experience.
So the City Assemblies podcast, they put out these three key things.
Okay.
God's sovereignty, even in a crisis.
Right.
Trusting his timing. And then finding that deep joy and assurance that comes with hope.
And I think what's really powerful about the podcast is that even when we feel totally lost and overwhelmed, they remind us that there's a bigger plan at play.
That makes you wonder, like how often do we get caught up in the immediate problems and forget to kind of step back and consider the possibility that things are unfolding in ways that we just can't see yet.
It's like we're so focused on the individual threads, that we miss that larger tapestry that's being woven.
And they use the Israelites in exile as a prime example. They were literally uprooted from everything they knew, forced into this foreign land.
I mean, talk about a crisis.
Seriously. The feeling of being lost must have been just overwhelming.
I can't even imagine.
It makes you wonder how they held on to hope in that situation.
Yeah. What can we learn from that?
Right. Because if they could find hope in those dire circumstances, what does that tell us about the potential for hope in our own lives? Even when we're facing what feels like, our own kind of exile.
That's such a good point.
It's almost as if their story serves as this blueprint for navigating our own personal crises.
Yeah, definitely.
Those moments when we feel like we've been thrown into the unknown.
And what I think is fascinating is that the message they received wasn't about this quick fix, or a sudden change.
No.
It was about holding on to hope in the midst of the struggle.
That resonates with me because so often we just want those instant solutions.
Oh, absolutely.
What if the real challenge is learning to trust in the process, even when it's uncomfortable or confusing?
That brings us to another crucial point the podcast made. Trusting God's timing.
It's a concept we hear a lot.
Yeah.
But living it out is a whole different story.
Especially in our world today.
I know, right?
Where everything's so fast-paced.
It's all about instant gratification.
Yeah, we want things now, and waiting just feels like we're wasting time.
But the Israelites' experience, it reminds us that waiting, it can be a crucial part of the journey.
And it's not about being passive, but actively trusting that God is working behind the scenes, even when we don't see the results.
And that's where the concept of active hope comes in.
That's what the podcast really emphasized, right?
Yeah, and it's not just wishing for things to get better.
No.
But actively seeking God,
right.
Finding joy in his promises, and then taking steps forward in faith.
Yeah, even when we don't have all the answers.
The podcast also made this really beautiful connection between the Israelites supporting each other in exile and the idea of finding strength in community.
It's like they're saying, hey, you don't have to go through tough times alone.
Absolutely. That's a crucial takeaway because when we isolate ourselves with our struggles, it's easy to get lost in negativity and despair.
But when we share our burdens with others, we open ourselves up to support, encouragement, new perspectives.
And that ties in perfectly with the podcast's extended thought,
Oh, yeah.
which focuses on how sharing our hope with others actually amplifies its power.
It's like hope is contagious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about receiving hope, but also being a source of hope for others, recognizing that we're all in this together and we can strengthen each other through those difficult times.
That brings us to a key question then, doesn't it? If the Israelites could find hope in the midst of their exile, leaning on their community and trusting in God's plan, how can we apply that same mindset to our own lives?
And that's where we're headed next. We'll dive deeper into those practical steps that we can take to cultivate hope in our own, exile moments.
Because the Israelites' story, it's not just ancient history.
Yeah.
It's a timeless reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope is always possible.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that after the break. Okay, so we've established that even in exile, surrounded by all that uncertainty,
Yeah.
there's this potential for hope. But what does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
How do we tap into that when things feel, I don't know, just messy?
Well, the podcast didn't give us like a step-by-step guide or anything.
Right.
But I think there are definitely some practical gems we can pull out.
Okay.
They talked about active hope.
Yeah.
It's not just a feeling. It's
Right.
something we actually participate in.
So not just crossing our fingers and hoping for the best.
Exactly. One thing they touched on was the importance of, reminding ourselves of God's promises when those anxieties are swirling around.
Yeah.
Going back to scripture, those verses that speak of hope, or
Right.
even remembering times when God came through before.
I can see that.
It can really ground us when our emotions are all over the place.
Yeah, like anchoring yourself to something solid when the storm's raging around you.
Exactly.
What else did they highlight?
Prayer. They didn't explicitly say it, but that conversation with God, pouring out our fears, worries, even anger,
Right.
it's incredibly powerful.
I love that it's not about pretending everything's okay,
Yeah.
but being honest with God about our struggles.
It's that act of surrender, acknowledging that we need His help, that we can't do it on our own.
And didn't they also talk about finding joy, even in the midst of hardship?
Yes. It's not about ignoring the hard stuff,
Right.
but intentionally seeking out moments of joy, gratitude, beauty,
Okay.
even amidst the chaos.
So like what?
Well, it could be as simple as that first sip of coffee in the morning,
Sure.
appreciating nature, connecting with a loved one.
Right.
Those little things, they can shift our focus.
Yeah.
Remind us there's still good in the world.
It's like finding those sparks of light that help you see your way through the darkness.
Exactly.
Now, they also spent some time on the importance of community, which feels huge for cultivating hope.
Absolutely. That resonated with me too.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. Sharing our burdens with trusted friends, family, a faith community.
Yeah.
It allows us to process emotions, receive support,
Okay.
gain new perspectives.
We weren't meant to carry everything alone.
No, we weren't.
Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in the struggle makes all the difference.
It really does.
And remember that extended thought about sharing our hope with others.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's not just a one-way street.
Right.
When we offer encouragement to someone going through a rough time, a listening ear, practical help,
It's powerful.
we not only lift them up, but we also reaffirm our own belief in the possibility of hope. So by being a source of hope for others, we actually strengthen our own hope.
It's a cycle. The more we share it, the more it grows within us and ripples outward.
It's like those Israelites,
Okay.
leaning on each other during their exile,
Right.
their shared faith, a source of strength.
Exactly.
It makes you think about how we can be that for each other today,
Yeah, absolutely.
offering a kind word, a helping hand, being that person who reminds others that even in the tough times, there's still good to be found.
What's amazing is that this idea of hope in exile, it's not limited to a specific time or place.
Right.
The Israelites found it centuries ago,
Yeah.
and we can find it today no matter what challenges we're facing.
Okay, so let's tie this back to what we discussed earlier about God's sovereignty.
Okay.
They said that even when things feel totally out of control,
Right.
God's still got a plan.
That can be a tough concept to grasp,
Yeah.
especially when we're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But what if, like you said earlier, it's about trusting the process even when we don't understand it?
I'm starting to see that, maybe letting go of the need to have all the answers.
Yeah,
Maybe that's part of the journey too.
it could be.
Surrendering to the idea that something bigger is at play, even if we can't see the whole picture.
And maybe that surrender, that act of faith,
Yeah.
that's what allows us to tap into that deeper well of hope.
Interesting.
Because if we're constantly trying to control everything,
Right.
we might miss out on the possibility that something beautiful is unfolding,
Okay.
something we couldn't have orchestrated on our own.
So it's about shifting our perspective from why is this happening to me
Yeah.
to what is God doing through this?
And I think that shift in perspective is key to accessing that kind of hope that sustains us through tough times. It's not about denying the pain or the struggle,
No.
but about holding on to the belief that something good can come out of it, even if we can't see it yet.
That makes me think about the Israelites again.
Yeah.
Imagine their exile, decades of living in a foreign land.
It must have felt like their hopes and dreams were shattered.
I know, right?
But what if that experience, as difficult as it was actually preparing them for something greater? What if it was shaping their character, refining their faith, and ultimately leading them to a deeper understanding of God's love and faithfulness?
That's a profound thought.
It is, isn't it?
It's like saying that even the most difficult experiences can be used for good, that even brokenness can be redeemed.
And maybe that's the ultimate message of hope.
Yeah.
That even in our darkest moments, there's always a chance for transformation, for growth, for something beautiful to emerge from the ashes.
Like a seed being planted in the ground.
Ah, I like that.
It has to go through a period of darkness and struggle before it can sprout and grow into something new.
And I think that's a beautiful analogy for the journey of faith.
Yeah.
We may go through seasons of darkness and uncertainty,
Right.
but if we hold on to hope, trust in God's timing, lean on our community, we can emerge from those experiences stronger, wiser, and more deeply rooted in our faith.
So what we're saying is that hope is not just about wishful thinking or positive vibes.
No, not at all.
It's a deep-seated conviction,
Yeah,
a trust in something bigger than ourselves,
right.
a belief that even in the midst of brokenness, there's always the potential for healing and growth.
It's a powerful message, and I think it's particularly relevant for anyone listening who might be going through their own, exile moment, facing challenges that feel insurmountable.
Absolutely. This deep dive isn't just about abstract theological concepts.
No, not at all.
It's about providing practical tools for navigating the inevitable crises that life throws our way.
And it's about reminding the listener that hope is not a luxury.
Yeah.
It's a necessity.
Especially in times of uncertainty.
It's the anchor that keeps us from drifting into despair.
I love that.
The compass that guides us toward a brighter future, even when the path ahead seems shrouded in darkness.
What stands out to you as the most valuable takeaway from this conversation so far?
For me, it's the reminder that hope is an active choice.
Okay.
It's not something that just happens to us. It's something we cultivate.
Right.
Through prayer, through remembering God's promises, through finding joy in the midst of hardship,
Right?
through leaning on our community.
I completely agree.
And what's so encouraging is that those are all things within our control.
Yeah.
We can choose to engage in those practices,
Right.
even when our circumstances feel overwhelming.
And the more we do,
Yeah.
the more we strengthen our own hope and become a source of hope for others.
It's like a ripple effect, spreading outward and creating a more hopeful world.
That's a beautiful thought, and it leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore how to apply these principles in a tangible way.
I'm excited to continue this conversation and see how this ancient wisdom can be brought to life in our modern world.
Okay, so we've talked about active hope, finding joy even when things are tough, and leaning on each other. But let's get even more practical here.
Yeah.
How do we actually weave all this into our lives? Especially when we're facing those moments that feel like, our own personal exile.
I'm glad you asked that. It's one thing to understand the concept of hope, but it's a whole other thing to actually live it out.
For sure.
And the podcast, they didn't give us like a step-by-step guide, but I do think we can pull out some really actionable wisdom.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, how they emphasize that active hope isn't passive?
Yeah?
It's not about waiting for things to change. It's about actively participating in that process of change.
Okay, so less wishing, more doing.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful things we can do, I think, is to really engage with God's promises.
Okay.
Like when those anxieties are swirling around, that's when we need to dive into Scripture. Those verses that speak of hope, peace, strength.
Yeah.
They're like anchors for our souls.
It's like reminding yourself of the truth when our feelings are trying to pull us in a different direction.
I love that analogy. And along with that, there's prayer. Talking to God, pouring out our hearts to Him, our fears, frustrations. It's an act of surrender.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that we need his help.
It's so freeing, isn't it, to just be real with God about what we're going through.
Absolutely. We don't have to put on a brave face or pretend like everything is okay. We can bring those raw emotions to him, trusting that he can handle it.
And I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah.
We don't have to have it all figured out to come to him.
Not at all.
We can come with questions, with doubts, even with anger.
And it's often in those moments of vulnerability that we experience his grace most profoundly.
Now, they also talked about finding joy, which might seem a little counterintuitive when you're in the middle of a crisis.
It's not about denying the pain or pretending that everything's okay. It's about intentionally choosing to focus on the good, even when it feels hard.
Okay, so those small moments of beauty, gratitude, connection, those matter.
They really do. It could be savoring that first cup of coffee.
Yeah?
Listening to your favorite song, taking a walk in nature, laughing with a friend.
Right.
They can shift our perspective. Remind us that even in the midst of hardship, there's still so much to be grateful for.
It's like those little glimmers of hope that remind you that the darkness won't last forever.
That's a good way to put it. And speaking of finding support, remember how the podcast talked about community?
Yeah.
That's a theme that keeps coming up, and for good reason.
Because we weren't meant to do life alone.
Exactly. When we share our burdens with trusted friends, family, a faith community, it allows us to process our emotions, receive encouragement, gain new perspectives. It's like having a whole team of cheerleaders in your corner.
Reminding you of your strength and cheering you on.
Yes, and sometimes just having someone listen without judgment can make all the difference.
For sure.
It's that reminder that we're not alone in our struggles. Everyone faces challenges, and there's strength in knowing that others have walked a similar path.
And remember that extended thought from the podcast about sharing hope with others.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
It really struck me.
Me too.
It's like they were saying that hope, it's contagious.
Right. The more we share it, the more it spreads.
So it's not just about receiving hope, but also about being that source of hope for others.
Exactly. Maybe it's offering a listening ear, a kind word, a helping hand, sharing your story of how you overcame a similar challenge. It's about reminding others that even in the darkest of times, there's still reason to hope.
It's like those Israelites leaning on each other during their exile.
Yes.
Their shared faith, like a beacon of light in the darkness.
That's a beautiful image.
And that's something we can all do, right? Regardless of our circumstances.
Absolutely.
We can choose to be those bearers of hope. Shine a light for others who might be struggling to find their way.
I love that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm wondering if you had to pick one key takeaway for our listeners to remember, what would it be?
I think it would be this. Hope is a choice. It's not something that just happens to us. It's something we actively cultivate. Through prayer, remembering God's promises, finding those sparks of joy amidst hardship, and leaning on our community.
And what's so encouraging is that those are all things that are in our control. We can choose to engage in those things, even when our circumstances feel totally overwhelming.
And the Israelites, they found hope in exile, surrounded by uncertainty. And so can we. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit and God's faithfulness.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel a little more equipped to navigate the storms of life and maybe even be a source of hope for others.
And remember, no matter how difficult things might seem, there's always reason to hope. Keep seeking it, keep nurturing it, keep sharing it. You never know what impact it might have.
Thank you for joining us for this special Shabbat podcast. We hope this time has inspired you to release your worries and embrace the peace that only the Most High can provide. Remember, His presence is your place of true rest. As you go into the week ahead, carry this peace with you, trusting in His unfailing love and care. Shabbat Shalom, City Assembly's family. May you be blessed and renewed until we meet again.